Prince William explodes after Camilla pushes her grandkids ahead of Kate's children. The diplomatic reception was supposed to be a quiet power play, the kind the royals had perfected. Velvet gowns, polished speeches, handshakes beneath chandeliers, but Camilla had something else in mind. She wasn't there just to nod politely and sip champagne. She had a point to make, and it came dressed in tiny shoes and pressed coats, her grandchildren. From the moment she entered the ballroom, Camilla's eyes never stopped scanning. She wasn't looking at the foreign dignitaries or catching up with parliament wives. She was watching the formation, the placement. Where were George, Charlotte, and Louis? Front and center, exactly where they'd always been. And her grandchildren? Eliza, Louis, and Gus off to the side. Again, not forgotten, just not included. Camilla had had enough. She gave Laura a single nod. It wasn't dramatic, barely noticeable, but Laura knew. She took a deep breath, steadied herself, and with trembling fingers led her children forward, past the ropes, past the quiet stairs, to the front row, level with the heirs. Silence, a silence so loud you could hear the cameras swivel. William's jaw tightened, Catherine's smile froze in place, and the guests, ambassadors, dignitaries, journalists, paused mid-sip, unsure if they were witnessing a breach or a statement. Camilla stayed still, unmoved, glass of wine in hand, but her knuckles whitened around the stem. It took less than a minute for a staff member to approach Laura. He whispered politely, asking her to return to the assigned area. She hesitated, but the pressure was unbearable. All eyes were on her children. So she nodded and stepped back, face flushed, tears slipping down silently. Her daughter Eliza glanced at George, not with envy, but with confusion. Gus tugged on her sleeve, asking in a whisper why they were being moved. From a distance, William whispered to Catherine, "This is war." She didn't disagree. That image, Laura wiping her tears, Camilla standing stone-faced, William glaring coldly, was captured by every lens in the room. Within hours, it was everywhere. On television, on phones, on the front page of every major paper, and social media exploded. Some hailed Camilla as brave, others called it manipulation. Hashtags like royal equality and Windsor only flooded timelines. People picked sides, and inside the palace, a deep crack widened. Camilla didn't flinch. She had expected backlash, but what she hadn't expected was Laura's heartbreak. Back at Clarence's house, Laura sat in silence. Her children were too young to understand what had happened, but she knew the damage. She'd brought them into a political storm, one they never asked for. Camilla sat alone in her study, scrolling through images of Laura's tear-streaked face. Her hand rested on the sapphire ring Laura had given her. Something that used to feel warm, now it felt cold, heavy. She had wanted justice, not humiliation, but this was how palace wars worked, quietly, brutally, and in front of the world. William, meanwhile, had already called for an emergency council meeting. He saw Camilla's move not as a gesture of family, but a challenge to the very structure of the monarchy. And worse, he saw it as a risk to George's future. If the public started seeing all royal grandchildren as equals, what happened to the line of succession? Back-channel advisors scrambled. Some urged diplomacy, others demanded a firm response. Catherine, caught between her husband and her stepmother-in-law, watched as the family unraveled. For King Charles, who had remained silent throughout, the moment had arrived. His wife and his son were no longer merely disagreeing, they were standing on opposite ends of a battlefield, and he, still clinging to a fading image of harmony, was the only one who hadn't made a move. Not yet. Rain swept across the streets of London as a storm gathered behind the palace gates. Inside Kensington Palace, William stood by the window, one hand gripping the edge of the sill, his knuckles. The diplomatic reception had crossed a line. Not just socially, not just within the family, Camilla's stunt had shaken the very foundation of the monarchy. And now, William was preparing for battle. He called a private meeting that evening. Lord Edward Fitzroy, Clara Henshaw, and Sir Thomas Ridley arrived promptly, their expressions grim. William didn't waste time with pleasantries. "She's using the press," William said bluntly, "and if we don't act now, she'll turn this into a full-blown campaign." Clara leaned forward. "She already has. The Guardian is publishing an op-ed tomorrow, framing her as the queen fighting for justice. Social media has been flooded with sympathy for Laura and those kids." William's expression didn't change. Sympathy isn't policy. Sir Thomas opened his leather folder, flipping through official succession regulations. There is no legal standing for her grandchildren to be granted equal placement. The line is clear, direct heirs. We use that? Lord Edward nodded. We convene the council, draft a statement reaffirming tradition and clarifying that only the monarch's direct descendants hold ceremonial precedence. Catherine entered the room silently, handing William a document she had printed just moments earlier. It was a transcript of Camilla's off-the-record dinner speech the night before. She hadn't named William, but the implication was obvious. The monarchy needed to modernize, and the current line was holding back progress. William read it once, then again. Then he folded it neatly and placed it on the table. "Get ready for war," he said. Meanwhile, at Clarence's house, Camilla sat surrounded by allies. Sir Henry, Lady Beatrix, and Margaret Wells were all present, sipping tea in tense silence. The room smelled faintly of burning wood, the fireplace crackling behind them. Camilla didn't speak for a while. She simply stared into the flames before finally saying, "They're going to attack. They'll call this a violation of protocol." Sir Henry exhaled. "They'll try to isolate you, paint William as the protector of tradition and you as reckless." Camilla looked over at Lady Beatrix. "We can't outpower him, but we can out-narrate him." Margaret tapped her notebook. "We've got a story lined up for the Times. Title reads, 'A Queen's Silent Fight. Why Camilla's Grandchildren Matter.' It's emotional, restrained, but powerful." Camilla nodded. "Run it." That weekend, the op-ed dropped. The photo of Laura's tear-stained face led the article. The words painted Camilla not as a political player, but as a grandmother battling a system that left her family behind. It worked. Public support surged. Celebrities reposted the story. Hashtags trended again. But Buckingham Palace didn't stay silent. On Monday, the official statement came. A cold, concise declaration read, "The structure of royal ceremonies reflects long-standing tradition, guided by succession and duty. Only direct heirs of the sovereign will appear in positions of formal prominence at state events." The message was clear. It was a line in the sand. Camilla read the statement twice. Her expression didn't change. But Laura, watching from her kitchen with Eliza beside her, turned off the television. She hadn't said much since the reception. She just held her children close, whispering promises she wasn't sure she could keep. Back at Clarence's house, Camilla walked into her study, sat at her desk, and opened a drawer. Inside was a letter from Laura. Just 3 lines. "Mother, I'm sorry. I didn't know it would get this bad. I can't do this anymore." Camilla closed her eyes, her fingers trembling as they gripped the paper. She had started a movement, but she had also started a fire. A gentle knock echoed through the stone hallway of Buckingham Palace. Inside the king's study, Charles sat motionless, his gaze locked on an old photograph of his mother. Queen Elizabeth's firm eyes stared back from the frame as if reminding him of the monarchy's unspoken rules. He hadn't intervened, not when Camilla made her move, not when William retaliated, but now silence had become its own betrayal. He set the photo down and reached for the handwritten note on his desk. It was from Camilla, not long, not angry, just a few words beneath her elegant signature. "I tried. They were just children." That line struck him harder than he expected. Across the palace, Camilla wandered the rose garden alone. The media frenzy had faded, but the consequences lingered. Her public image was split. Half viewed her as a modern queen, the other as an overreaching stepmother. Laura had retreated completely, withdrawing her children from future events. Camilla hadn't heard her voice in days. The silence from her daughter hurt more than any press headline. In Wiltshire, Laura watched Gus build a small fort out of couch cushions. Eliza sat on the floor, quietly coloring. The chaos of cameras, whispers at school, and flashing headlines had left scars too deep for children to name. Laura held her phone, tempted to call her mother, but every time her thumb hovered over the screen, a fresh wave of guilt swept in. She'd wanted her kids to be seen, not turned into a symbol. In Kensington, William stood alone in the palace corridor, peering out through a narrow window. A group of tourists snapped photos at the gate. He'd won. The line of succession remained intact. The monarchy's public face hadn't cracked. Yet something within him felt hollow. A cold victory, secured with tradition but soaked in resentment. He returned to his drawing room where Catherine sat on the couch sipping lukewarm tea. The fireplace flickered, casting dancing shadows across the ornate rug. "She's not speaking to Charles," Catherine said softly. William nodded. Laura's pulled out from every engagement. They've gone completely silent. "I know," William replied. Catherine looked up. "Do you think we went too far?" William didn't answer. He just stared at the fire. At Clarence's house, Camilla opened a drawer and pulled out a thick, worn album. Inside were photos the public had never seen. Laura's first birthday, baby Eliza in her arms, Gus splashing in a fountain on a summer afternoon. None of it had anything to do with crowns or courtrooms. Just love. Quiet, messy, real love. Her fingers lingered on one page, a photo of her and Laura, arms locked, laughing at a picnic. That version of them felt like a different lifetime. She closed the book, set it aside, and wrote a letter. "Laura, I'm sorry. I didn't want this to hurt you. I only wanted the world to see what I've always seen in them. In you. Maybe I lost sight of what matters. Not the front row, just being there. If you're ready, I'd like to come visit. No press, no palace, just tea. Love, Mom." Weeks passed before a reply came. It was short, yes, but only tea. And so, one rainy morning, Camilla left her title behind and arrived quietly at Laura's cottage. No security, no entourage. Just a grandmother holding a paper bag of scones, standing at the front door. Laura opened it slowly. No words at first, just a long, tired hug. Inside, Eliza peeked from behind the sofa. Gus smiled shyly. Camilla smiled back. No thrones, no cameras, just family, and for the first time in months, that was enough.